My father told me I wasn't his real daughter. Not in private. Not gently. He did it in front of everyone, at my grandmother's 80th birthday dinner. We were at the Blackwell estate, seated at a long candlelit table, surrounded by a sea of cousins, uncles, and family friends. Glasses clinked, silverware scraped against porcelain. The kind of scene that should have felt like warmth and legacy. Dad stood to make a toast. He always loved being the center of attention. To family, he said, raising his glass. The real kind. I laughed, thinking it was one of his cryptic, pompous lines. Then he looked straight at me and added, Jennifer, maybe it's time you knew. You're not biologically mine. And let's not confuse bloodlines when it comes to an inheritance. The entire room went silent. My aunt dropped her fork. My cousin looked like she'd seen a ghost. I couldn't breathe. My heart thudded so loudly, I swear the crystal chandeliers trembled. I wanted to scream. I wanted to disappear. But mostly, I wanted to understand. Why now? Why like this? What was I supposed to do with that kind of information, tossed out like a party trick? And worse, was it even true? Or was this just another way to humiliate me? For days after that dinner, I walked around in a fog. Not the kind you see in old mystery films, but the kind that creeps into your lungs and weighs you down from the inside. I wasn't just heartbroken, I was unanchored. Everything I thought I knew about my life, my family, my identity suddenly felt hollow. I kept hearing his voice. Let's not confuse bloodlines when it comes to inheritance. The words didn't just sting. They echoed, like he wasn't just cutting me out of a will, but cutting me off as a person. Growing up, I was never the favorite. My father, Gregory, had a way of making me feel like I was tolerated, not celebrated. Every honor roll, every debate championship, every acceptance letter, he'd nod and say, "Good job," with the same energy he reserved for finding the remote. But when William, my cousin, the golden boy, got his driver's license, Gregory threw a backyard barbecue. When William made the football team, he bought matching jackets. It wasn't subtle. William was the true Holloway, after all, son of Thomas, my father's younger brother. Blonde, athletic, with that clean-cut charm that Gregory admired so much. I used to tell myself it was just favoritism. Some parents were like that, but now the puzzle pieces had rearranged into something far more cruel. On the third day after the party, I went to see my mother. I didn't call ahead. I didn't want her to prepare. I needed answers, raw, unfiltered. When she opened the door, she looked like she'd aged 10 years since the party. Her eyes, always sharp and composed, were ringed with red. "Lena," she said softly. "Is it true?" I cut in. "What he said about me not being his." Her lip quivered. For a moment I thought she might lie, but then she stepped aside and let me in. We sat in silence for several minutes. I could hear the clock ticking in the kitchen, the faint hum of the refrigerator, even the creak of the house settling. Everything felt louder than her voice when she finally whispered, "Yes." I didn't move. "I was young," she continued, her hands twisting nervously in her lap. "I had just started dating your father, Gregory, but before him I was seeing someone else. It was brief, emotional, complicated. It was Thomas." I blinked. "Uncle Thomas?" She nodded, tears pooling in her eyes. "It was never supposed to happen the way it did. I broke it off before Gregory proposed, but then I found out I was pregnant. I wasn't sure. And Gregory never asked. He assumed you were his, and I let him believe it. I thought I was protecting everyone." I wanted to scream. Instead, I laughed, a bitter, disbelieving sound. "So Gregory found out, and instead of confronting you, he waited until Grandma's birthday to humiliate me in front of the entire family?" She flinched. "He got the DNA results 6 months ago. I think he's been planning it since then. But I swear, Lena, I never meant for you to be caught in the middle." Caught in the middle. That was always my role, wasn't it? Middle of the room, middle of conversations, middle child energy without the siblings. I stood up. "I need time," I said. My voice was flat, not angry. "Just done. You kept this from me for my whole life, and he's punishing me for something I didn't choose." She tried to reach for my hand, but I stepped back. "I'm not mad that Thomas is my father," I added. "I'm mad that no one thought I deserved to know." That night I didn't sleep. I sat at my desk with old family photos scattered around me. Gregory, always on the edge of the frame. Thomas smiling in the background. And me, centered but never really seen. I made a decision then. If Gregory thought he could erase me, he was wrong. He wanted to play with bloodlines? Fine. Let's see what happens when the truth comes out, with proof. And I knew exactly how to get it. I didn't sleep the night after the dinner. My father's words kept echoing in my head. "You're not my real daughter." He'd said it so casually, like tossing out trash. The weight of it crushed everything I thought I knew about my family, about who I was. I stared at the hotel ceiling until dawn, eyes wide open, heart ice cold. But even in that chaos, something clicked. His timing, the suddenness, the will. He said it just before the reading of Grandma Evelyn's will, and I couldn't ignore the connection. I knew what he was doing. He was trying to cut me out. He didn't care about the truth. He just wanted control, and I wasn't going to let him win. The next day, I scheduled a DNA test. Not just a simple one, but a full genetic breakdown. I needed more than proof I wasn't his. I needed to know who I was. Quietly, I contacted a private lab and sent them a sample from myself, and with some persuasion, one from Uncle Thomas, Dad's younger brother. It wasn't easy. Thomas was nervous when I brought it up, but when I looked him in the eye and asked, "Please, I need to know," he didn't hesitate. While waiting for the results, I dove into old family records. I requested and archived hospital files, scanned through family Bibles, and even made a few quiet trips to the county clerk's office. I was trained in law, yes, but now I was using every ounce of that skill for something personal. Gregory, meanwhile, was making moves of his own. He'd started spreading the story, telling relatives that I wasn't really a Holloway, that I was adopted, a mistake his wife had brought into the family. It was subtle at first, then louder. And with Grandma Evelyn nearing the end in her hospital bed, the timing was far from accidental. He wanted her estate, the properties, the trust fund, the family name, but most of all, he wanted me out of the way. The DNA results arrived 2 weeks later. I sat alone in my apartment when I opened them. My hands were shaking. The first line was conclusive. Thomas Holloway, probability of paternity, 99.98%. I had my answer. He was my biological father, but that wasn't all. The extended genetic profile showed something stunning. My match with Evelyn was stronger than with Gregory. Much stronger. It didn't add up. Unless Gregory wasn't actually related to her. It felt insane. But I followed the thread, and what I found unraveled everything. Gregory was adopted. Buried in the archives, I found court documents dated back to 1972. Evelyn had lost a baby late in her pregnancy, and months later she adopted a boy from a nearby orphanage. That boy was Gregory. He wasn't her biological son, which meant Gregory had spent his life claiming a birthright that was never his. And I, the girl he called not a real daughter, was actually Evelyn's only biological grandchild. I took everything I found. DNA reports, adoption records, copies of Evelyn's letters to the orphanage, and compiled them into a single folder. I didn't plan to shout or scream, I just wanted the truth to speak. Then came the reading of the will. The room was full, cousins, lawyers, family, friends. Gregory stood tall, smug, confident. He opened his mouth to speak, probably planning to declare I wasn't part of the family. I beat him to it. I stood, handed the lawyer the file, and calmly said, "Before we begin, I believe these documents should be part of the record." There was silence. Then pages flipping, eyebrows rising, gasps. The lawyer cleared his throat. "Based on this documentation, it is evident that Miss Lena Holloway is the biological daughter of Thomas Holloway, son of Evelyn Holloway." He turned to Gregory. "Furthermore, it appears you were adopted by Mrs. Holloway following the tragic loss of her biological child in 1972. Gregory's face turned pale. William's mouth dropped. My mother, seated quietly near the back, looked down, tears brimming. And I looked straight at my so-called father. No yelling, no drama, just the truth. Loud and undeniable. "I guess I'm more of a Holloway than you ever were." He didn't say a word. He couldn't. Because the bloodline he used to shame me was never even his. The room was suffocating. Not because of the decor. It was beautiful in that old money oil painting over the fireplace kind of way. No, it was suffocating because of the people in it. The silence before the storm, the weight of secrets about to collapse in on themselves. We had gathered at the Holloway estate for the reading of Evelyn's will. My grandmother, my only true ally in this family, though no one knew just how deep our bond ran. Gregory, My legal father stood at the head of the table like a CEO about to announce quarterly profits. Dressed to the nines, his tone was casual, arrogant. It goes without saying that my mother always intended for me to continue the Holloway legacy. As her only biological child, the estate will remain intact under my leadership. He didn't even glance at me, like I wasn't even in the room. The estate attorney cleared his throat. Let's begin. My palms were cold, not from fear but from anticipation, from the certainty that years of silence, pain, and invisibility were about to be rewritten. The final will and testament of Evelyn Holloway, the attorney read, dated 6 months before her passing and legally witnessed under the state of New York. I could feel Gregory's smugness growing like a shadow, but the next line shattered it. I leave the entirety of my estate, including real estate, holdings, intellectual properties, and financial assets, to Lena Holloway. There was a beat. Then, like a dam breaking, voices, gasps, outrage. What the hell is this? Gregory slammed his palm against the mahogany table. That's impossible. She's not my daughter. She's not even a Holloway. I stood up slowly, steady. You're right about one thing, I said, eyes locked on his. I'm not your daughter. The room went still again. But I am a Holloway, more than you ever were. I walked to the front of the table and handed the attorney a thick manila folder. Inside were the documents that told the truth. My truth. DNA tests, I explained calmly. This one confirms that Thomas Holloway is my biological father, and this... I pulled out a second document, is an official copy of Gregory Holloway's adoption record, sealed in 1973 and unsealed by court order last month. The silence now wasn't stunned. It was terrified. The legacy Gregory had built, his title, his position, his authority, crumbled in seconds. He wasn't Evelyn's biological son, just a boy she adopted after her own child was stillborn, a fact no one had ever questioned until now. William, his golden boy son, turned pale. Wait, adopted? You lied to everyone? Gregory opened his mouth, then shut it. He had nothing. I wasn't done. There's one more thing, I said, and turned to the attorney. The letter. He nodded, pulling out a small handwritten note in Evelyn's script. Lena, a last name means nothing without heart. You've shown me the values our family was built on. Integrity, strength, and compassion. Let the world argue bloodlines. I know what matters. The Holloway legacy belongs to you. Evelyn. I didn't cry. Gregory slumped into his chair, his shoulders caving in like his entire identity was caving with it. William looked betrayed, humiliated, and Thomas, my biological father, stood slowly, eyes glassy. Lena, he said quietly, I don't expect forgiveness, but I'd be honored if you let me be part of your life. I looked at him. This wasn't the victory I had dreamed of as a little girl, desperate for approval. This was better, because it wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about reclaiming my name, my place, my voice. As I turned to leave the room, I felt everyone's eyes on me. I didn't need applause. I didn't want pity. All I wanted was out of the shadows, out of the lies. The Holloway legacy was mine now, not because of blood, but because I earned it, and no one could take that from me again. Weeks had passed since the reading of Evelyn Holloway's will. The estate had quieted down, but the aftermath was still echoing in everyone's lives. Gregory vanished from the public eye. Word spread that he sold the townhouse, cut ties with old associates, and relocated to a small town across the country where no one would connect him to the name he once wore like a crown. But the truth has a way of clinging to people who run from it. It lingers, and in his case, it followed. William, the cousin who once looked down on me with smug superiority, left his high-profile firm in Manhattan just weeks after. I heard it wasn't because of scandal, but because he couldn't look at himself in the mirror anymore. For years he idolized his father. Now he had to accept that man was a fraud who built his image on a lie. Thomas, my biological father, was a gentler storm. He didn't beg for forgiveness. He didn't try to rewrite the past. Instead, he showed up slowly, carefully, like someone trying to win back the trust of a child without asking for it. Sometimes we'd meet for coffee, sometimes we'd talk about Evelyn, and sometimes we'd say nothing at all, letting the silence heal what words couldn't. As for me, I didn't keep the estate to prove a point. I didn't stand up in that room, reveal the truth, and take my inheritance to exact revenge. I did it because I was done apologizing for existing. The house on Windmere Drive didn't stay a mansion for long. Within 6 months, it became the Evelyn Holloway Justice Center, a nonprofit law clinic offering free legal aid to women and children in vulnerable communities. We turned what once symbolized exclusion and elitism into a space for empowerment. In honor of Evelyn, I started the Legacy Beyond Blood Scholarship, a fund dedicated to helping first-generation law students, particularly women of color, who face the same invisible walls I once battled alone. Each recipient received not just money, but mentorship. And with every success they achieved, a part of me healed. Then one afternoon, as the rain tapped gently against my office window, I found an envelope slipped under my door. No name, just a simple handwritten note. You were always the better one. I'm sorry it took me this long to see it. I didn't cry. I didn't call. I just tucked it away. Not as a souvenir, but as closure. That night I reread Evelyn's final letter, the one she'd left just for me. Her handwriting, so elegant, now felt like a final embrace. You're more Holloway than anyone in that room. Not by blood, but by truth, by fight, by fire. And the world needs more women like you. For the first time in years I felt still, not because everything was fixed, but because I no longer needed fixing. I wasn't seeking validation. I wasn't fighting to be heard. I had already spoken, loudly, clearly. And for once, the silence that followed wasn't empty. It was peaceful. I stood in the lobby of the center as the sun began to set, casting golden streaks through the stained glass windows. I imagined the little girl I used to be, hiding in the hallways of family parties, wondering why she never felt like she belonged, and I smiled. She belonged now. She always had. She just needed to claim it. Moral of the story: truth doesn't always win applause, but it brings peace. Sometimes the family you're born into isn't the one who defines you. It's the one you build, the legacy you shape, and the voice you reclaim. Don't wait for someone else to give you permission to be seen. You already are. If your identity was built on a lie, would you risk everything to speak the truth? Or would you protect the comfort of others by staying silent?